Welcome to the Understanding Project Management Discussions podcast. This is Dave Barrett. My guest today is Charu Sachdeva. Charu's background is in graphic design, and from this moved into operations and project management roles. Our topic is project communications, where we discuss the importance of communications planning, its relation to stakeholder planning, and the challenges of working with virtual teams. Please welcome Charu Sachdeva. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Dave, for inviting me for this discussion.
Great. Well, our topic today is a really important topic in project management. When I introduced this to my students, I often use the metaphor of that communications in a project is like air in a room. You need it. It needs to be there. And if you don't have enough, it starts to, impact the project and can even, start to make it, not able to function. So I'm really interested in your perspective on communications. I understand from talking to you before we started that you've been very involved with communications on your past projects. So my first question is when you've been managing projects before, sort of how do you approach communications? Like, it's a broad question, but sort of what's your view of sort of communication planning in project management?
Yes, Dave, I think you rightly said it. The metaphor that you quote to students about being in, it's like an air in the room. Yes, it's exactly like that. And whenever a project starts, the first thing that comes to our mind as project manager, when I used to work as a project manager, the first thing that I used to think about is how to manage this particular stakeholder or the client. And I used to create my strategy for managing those clients, because if that client is someone with whom I have already worked with, my strategy would be different. And if it's a new client or a new stakeholder, my strategy would be different. And obviously the team that I'm working with, which is the team I'm working, have I worked with before? If not, then what will be my strategy? Will I be involving those people much more and have a discussion with them? So that used to be first thing that used to come in my mind when I used to handle projects.
Right, and that's a good sort of segue or reminder that communications planning is very closely related to stakeholder planning. That they're almost like they're cousins of each other. That you can't talk about communications without thinking about stakeholder management and how do you engage the stakeholders and who they are and what they're about. So I think that's true. It also confuses. I know in terms of interacting with my students, they're often confused by, well, what's the difference between a stakeholder plan and a communication plan? And they sort of get mixed up between those two a little bit. But I like the fact that the very first thing you go to is stakeholders to say, what do we know about them? How are we going to engage with them? But now, then that leads to how are we going to communicate with them? So right. In your communication planning, what type of information are you like? Do you create a formal communication plan? Is it something you in the projects that you managed, do you write it down and have it in a table, or is it just something that's more in your head and that you're just sort of keeping track of?
No, I think keeping in my head will not help my team members and my other fellow managers on the floor, because whenever we start any project, as I said, we think about the stakeholders. Is it a new client? And the first thing we do is creating the kickoff meeting presentation. So this presentation is a kind of a formal document for me to document what I'm going to do as a part of communication on that particular project. Because when I am going into a kickoff meeting, the things that I will be discussing is understanding the project requirement. And with that, the important agenda of our kickoff meeting was used to be the communication plan. That who are the people they are going to work with, who is the first point of contact for them, what will be the kind of communication we'll be sharing, and one question which I always used to ask my stakeholders or my clients was, how comfortable are they speaking on phone, or are they comfortable writing down emails, or are they comfortable chatting on a chat tool that we used to have in our organization. So that question was very important, because I used to I need to understand what type of channel are they comfortable with. So that document that we used to create for the kickoff meeting used to consist of all these details, that we can reach out to the stakeholder during these hours at or we can set up the call, or we can chat with them on the tool, or whatever. So we used to document that down, and we used to write down, this is the escalation process. So this person is your first point of contact, this is the second, and this person will be sending out the reports on weekly basis, or this person will be creating the dashboards, monthly dashboards, etc. So all that had to be documented. If it is not documented, it was difficult for us to remember what exactly is required by the client. And we agree with them when we are sharing our screens with them during our kickoff call. We used to agree with all those points, that okay, we will be having a weekly call at this time. Because of time zone difference, we used to first discuss the time, what was comfortable with them, and we used to write that down. And we used to create the communication plan, that these are the 5 things we will be sharing on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. So everything had to be documented. We never left something kept verbal. If we used to discuss something on kickoff, then we used to write it down in the minutes of the meeting that we used to send after the call.
Right. I really like the idea that you've raised, and it's, you know, it should be readily apparent, but it's good to say that this is something in the kickoff meeting that you overtly talk about, that you review the communication plan. It's not sort of just implied that, yes, we'll have good communication and, you know, we'll see you later, that you step through that. And as well, as you mentioned, you know, get their input into it as to, you know, well, do you prefer phone calls? Do you prefer emails? Or what is your desired level of, or types of communication? So again, it's that sort of understanding your stakeholder idea, that, you know, there are email people in the world and there are phone people in the world. They prefer one or the other. And so rather than just, you know, sort of, you know, kind of being, you know, frankly, kind of irritating to them by constantly going in the other approach, you're sort of cooperating with them. So how do you, I mean, one of the things I've always found with communication planning is that, you know, it's in the detail of, okay, do we have a weekly status reporting, or, you know, a daily, or is it monthly, or is it twice a month? How do you, besides the stakeholder input, which is good, you know, how else do you decide that? Like, what are the factors that you, because constructing a communication plan is easy to say, but tough to do. And how did you build the detail out when you were doing them?
So it depended on the type of project. So if it was a you know, long duration project, it didn't make any sense to connect on a daily basis. And if the client was interested, or the stakeholders are interested to see the progress, and we check that when we have the kickoff meetings, that how frequently would they like to see the plan. So otherwise, if it was a longer duration project, we used to keep our you know, communication on a weekly basis, or bi-weekly basis most of the times. But we also had a type of project that we used to call on-demand projects. So on-demand is something for which the turnaround time used to be 1 day or 2 days maximum. And that used to be a, you know, internal communication material that we used to prepare for the clients, and for that we didn't have time. So for those type of projects, we had to be you know, meeting or discussing things on a daily basis till the time that project was over. So we used to keep a time during the end of the day that we will be meeting with the client, sharing the status, communicating with them, and checking with them that are they okay, or with the progress that we have made till now, is there any other input they would like to make for us to do, because it's something which we have to quickly turn around within 2 or 3 days maximum. Right. So that was the idea, that if it was a longer duration, weekly status was okay, but if it's a on demand, then daily basis is required.
Yeah. One of the things I found in the communication planning that I did on my projects in the past is that I always found that I, have to admit, I always didn't necessarily get them right the first time. I found it was an ongoing adjustment that I'd often do. And, sort of, I don't mean trial and error, but I mean, it's sometimes you try your best to look at those variables like duration and the project, the complexity, the turnaround time, the stakeholder norms and so on. You try your best, but then, you kind of go, ooh, we better adjust that. Is that similar? Did you find that, or was that just sort of me?
No, no, yes, of course. As since my work was mostly related to the design work, and design is very subjective. So if we are not communicating, we are not understanding the requirement properly, then things can go, something opposite can be created. So if the designer is not able to understand what exactly the client is looking for, and for that, sometimes I used to keep my designer as well on the call so that he hears directly from the client what is required. Instead of doing to and fro, it was always good to show them the progress, that this is what we have designed till now. So are they comfortable? Are they okay? Do they have any inputs that we should be making to this design? Or is this okay to proceed with the same concept? So that is how we used to work. And yes, you rightly said that trial and error are sometimes okay, but things like designing things, there we need to have regular inputs and regular communication with the client.
Right. Yes, that is something in our discussion beforehand, is you were telling me that your background and on many of the projects that you've been managing are design related,
Yes.
based, graphic design and so on. And I can see that where in a creative type of project like that, where you're creating something that is more dynamic, let's say, you would need much more communication, potentially more checkpoints and things back and forth between you and the client, or your project and the client, to make sure that they're still agreeing with the direction that's going and so on. So it's sort of the increased importance of communication.
Yes. Yes,
So
that's right.
So, is there any is there any instances where you were in a project that you've worked on, where you kind of were part of the way through the project or at the end, and you said, "Oh, we should have communicated differently." Like, are there any examples that you have where I say, if I could do it over again, I would have communicated this way versus that. So just curious as to whether you had anything like that occur.
It used to happen many a times because, as I said, the design work is something, and there are so many tools and software available for designing a single thing. So sometimes one tool is okay for designing a collateral, sometimes some things are not. So what happened in one of the projects, the client wanted something to be designed in a using specific design tool, and we use that tool to create a booklet kind of a thing for that person. And later on, that point came to my mind, and I usually used to ask the client that are they comfortable us doing something in that particular tool, so that in future, if they want to they want to make quick changes, would they like to do on their own, or would they be coming back to us? So I wanted to have that discussion, have that communication, but somehow during the discussion, this point never was raised, and it got missed. And when we gave back the final output to the client, and then they came back asking the same question, can I make the changes if required at the last moment? And then I realized that I should have communicated all the possible options of creating that booklet instead of just agreeing to what they said they wanted the booklet in. So I should have asked or communicated that point upfront, that these are the possible options for us to create it, and it will give you the same output, but the backend, the source file will be different. Some
Right.
source files are editable, some source files are not. So that used to happen, and that happened in one important client was there, and it happened.
Yeah, I've often reflected on the idea that when projects fail or if they underperform, Yeah, and there's usually a lessons learned or a retrospective process done, either at the end of the project or iteratively through the project. And I found that, almost 9 out of 10 times, the reason for things going wrong is it's not so much the ability of the people, the scheduling, the technical abilities, and so on. It usually is communication that is the reason. It
Right.
comes down to, okay, that person didn't know we were doing this, and this decision was made because they didn't know that, and it all comes down to, communication. And had we been able to, you know plan it out better, or set up an environment, or have the right type of people at the right type of meetings, or the right document that's created, it could have been avoided. So it's the payback is big. Um, where do you think, how do you think communication, well, obviously it's being affected by the current, state, the pandemic and lockdowns and so on, but what do you think the impact is in terms of the fact that we can't have teams physically together, in communications? Is how's that affecting things, would you say, or any sort of thoughts on that?
Oh yes, it is affecting big time, I feel, because if the team is sitting together and they get stuck somewhere, they quickly used to walk up to the other designer's desk or other person's desk, and they used to quickly check, okay, this is not working, can you help? And that person used to help. But now, if I am not sitting with my team, I will always feel like, will that person be available? Is it okay to call this person at that time? Is it okay? And I might ping that person or on chat and wait for his response. So it is affecting my timelines. It is affecting the quick resolutions we used to get when we used to sit together. So that is something I feel it is affecting. And being a project manager as well, I feel that when I used to see my team working in front of me, I used to feel a sort of comfort that yes, someone, people are working. But
Yes.
now when I'm not able to see them, I'm not sure if I'll be getting the output on time. Are they working, not working? I can't see them. So that question remains in our heads, that the team is working or not. So
Yeah,
that's different.
that's one of the challenges of management. I mean, that's going to be a challenge ongoing. I mean, I think many organizations are, once we're back, in terms of when things are back to normal, there still, I think, will be, and there's lots of literature out there in terms of organizations working more remotely than they used to, perhaps. So I think it's something, as project managers, that we're going to need to get, used to and better at. And I think one of the things that you mentioned about, how do you keep that personal connection? You can't see
Right.
them on a day-to-day basis. You don't walk by them. You don't say hello at the coffee station, or you don't walk down to you know, to a meeting together, where that sort of, uh, um, idle sort of small talk occurs. That sort of communication between the lines doesn't
Yeah.
occur as much. And I think it's something that we have to work on as communicators. We have to say, well, how can we fill that gap? Like you mentioned, the use of chat software and so on, and I'm a great fan of that as well. It's ways you can create, sort of rapport
Mm-hmm.
without having to send someone a formal email or call them on the phone and interrupt them when they're doing something important. So I think there are ways to do it, but I think, we all have to sort of figure out what that is, because, you and I, we're not sitting together. We're in two separate, locations right now. We're not just going to see each other in the hall and say hi. Like, that just doesn't occur. So we have to work on different ways. So that's
Right, right. And
that's
I
key.
think these chats, as we say that communication is not only verbal, it's also through your face expression and your body language. That also speaks. So when you are walking by your team member and you just wave your hand and smile at them, it makes them feel good, and say hello, and it makes them feel good. And I think that is getting replaced with these emojis on chatting, and then in the
Right.
morning come and say. So when we used to work remotely on our projects, I used to make sure that I, ping everyone once in a day and say, hello, how are you? And with a smiley. and all those things, so that they feel that the manager is kind of still trying to connect with us. And that helps a lot. And I have seen that they feel comfortable communicating with you. They feel comfortable raising points, raising issues with you. It's kind of, making them, giving them a trust that, yes, I am available, I am there, I am here to hear you. So they used to reach out to me very easily. So they never used to hesitate. And that is what I always try to build the relation with my team members.
Right. That's an important point, and something that isn't necessarily always indicated in a communication plan, but it's almost that, it's not even a specific communication. It's more of a, what environment are we creating?
Yes.
Because, how well your team communicates depends often on those daily hellos, or those, sort of chats that you've had that don't really have a purpose, like a specific purpose. It's not like every time you call someone or communicate with something, it doesn't mean you want to get something, that you're looking for a report or a deliverable. That sometimes it's just say hello, how are you doing? Here's a smiley face. Like if it's electronic, here's a, here's a meme that I thought was funny, or here's an emoji, or just how was your weekend? And those are the things that we used to do, in person, and will be hopefully doing very soon. But in the virtual world, we need to find a way to replace that, because it's still about people working together.
Right.
So having that, in your communication plan, or at least in your mind, like it's not something that maybe is written down quite as effectively, or maybe it's really, we were talked about the stakeholder engagement plan. Maybe that belongs more in the stakeholder engagement plan or management plan.
Yes.
But it still is connected. Like it's not like
Right.
these are two different things. So
Right.
that's really cool. So anyways, this has been a really interesting conversation, Charu. Really, your background and your experience with regard to communication is really rich, and I thanks for sharing with your ideas and experience with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. And again, thank you for inviting. It was an interesting discussion, I feel. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.